Hello everyone, welcome along. The aim of this video is to share my favourite 20 pictures from 2022. Sorry it's coming out a bit late, but I'm pretty slow catching up with some of my processing. And like most photographers, my most recent pictures are my favourites, so there were plenty to include from my December trip to Missoul. That said, I don't think 2022 was a classic year for me. It was wonderful getting back out there and travelling again, but I didn't have the best luck. Being confined to my room with COVID on one trip for a few days. Thankfully, didn't have any symptoms, so I was perfectly well, just not able to shoot. And then throughout the year, and thankfully didn't pass on COVID to anyone else because of the isolation, so that was all good. But throughout the year, I think I didn't have that much luck on my big animal trips. Two of my big animal trips were both snorkeling trips, one to do basking sharks in Scotland, where sadly we didn't see any basking sharks, and then another trip to Norway, to the Arctic Norway, to do orcas, which was an incredible trip. But I just didn't have any luck with passes on that trip. Thankfully, lots of others in the group did, so we got lots of good pictures, just not on my particular camera. But it was great to be back out there and travelling and shooting again, and so I thought I'd put this presentation together, sharing with you, if the technology works, my 20 favourite pictures from the year. So hopefully you can still see me now. Yep. So this is a favourite moment during the year, photographing a whale shark that had come to the back of our boat in the Maldives at Sandy Beach behind me in the picture. One landmark I did pass during this year is I did my 5,000th scuba dive. That one up, I can't make sure I put the right direction here. There we go. No, that way. That one up there is me about to do my 5,000th scuba dive at Tank Rock with Ruth and Noldy dive guides up there. And there's some more pictures of me on adventures during the year in Canada, in Scotland, in Norway, in the Maldives, and in Raja Ampat. So I've been very lucky to travel a great deal. And these are my favourite 20 images. Right, let's see if we can keep this slideshow going. So in at number 20. This picture here is a juvenile wolf eel. I think this picture is a real favourite, really because of the subject. Juvenile wolf eels are very, very beautiful, and usually you don't get the chance to have them posing in such a nice environment. And this one here was posing in between this red soft coral and this yellow sponge up in British Columbia on Vancouver Island in Canada. This picture was taken with a Nikon D850 and a 60mm lens. I've got some notes here, so I'll just keep them there. 60mm lens, taken two-barrel housing, retro flashes, which are going to come up a lot during this talk. Taken on f10, just really to try and get some separation from the background so the subject stands out, but still have some background detail in the surroundings. So f10 seemed a good compromise with the 60mm lens, and then shot on 1/250th of a second because it was a flash dominated image at ISO 64. Right, on to our next shot, which is in the UK. I did very little UK diving this year, but actually one of the days where I did get great luck was going up to Cayman Islands to do a shoot with Caroline Robertson Brown, who's in this picture, and the team from Mares UK. And we were just doing some UK diving photography and having some fun diving together. To be honest, there wasn't really a serious shoot. It was just a chance to have a day together. And this one Caroline's modelling for me by the aeroplane wreck in Cayman Islands. And we were very lucky with the conditions. We had very nice visibility, nice blue water in Cayman Islands, good visibility, and not many divers in the water, so nice clean conditions to get these sort of more expansive wide angle shots. So I really like this shot, taken with the Nikon D850 and 8-15mm lens, shot with the Subal housing and retro flash guns, although there's not a lot of flash in this picture. This picture might have even been taken without flash, I don't remember. And this picture's taken on f13, which is the aperture I typically go to for all my wide angle. It's a great aperture for wide angle photography on a full frame camera because it gives you really good corner sharpness and plenty of depth of field in the photo without shutting down unnecessarily more. Now, I think for a lot of people, shutting down to f13 is a lot, and it does challenge you to have lots of light. But I think when you can shoot at f13 with a full frame camera, underwater, you tend to get really good performance on the wide angle lenses with the optics of the dome ports. And this is shot on ISO 640 at 1/125th of a second. Right, on to number 18. This picture here is taken in Socorro in the Pacific, well out in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Mexico. And this is just a simple manta silhouette shot. But I like this picture. I like the manta, and I like the three blackjacks that are following it. And I think it makes for a memorable picture. We had a very nice trip to Socorro. Nothing extraordinary happened, but all the classics were there. Lots of good manta action. And what's great about the mantas at Socorro is they're really curious, so they come to you. So to get nice, clean images like this, I tend to swim away a bit from the group, just sort of always keep myself about sort of 15 meters, 10 meters away from other people. And then maybe even if other people are getting more action, when I do get action, when I do get mantas coming to me, I get nice, clean opportunities without bubbles from other people in the picture. So as long as I can control my own breathing, I don't have the problem with bubbles in the picture, and got this chance for this silhouette shot. The technique for this shot to get the silhouette is I was shooting pictures with flash, but in order to switch the camera into shooting without flash, one of the quickest things, certainly for a silhouette, to do is just to knock the shutter speed up a couple of clicks. So I knocked my shutter speed up to 1/400th. That's beyond the sync speed of my camera, and at that speed my flash trigger no longer fires unless I have the flash guns into high speed sync mode. And then as a result, I don't have any flash in my picture, so I can very quickly go to an available light shot and create a nice clean silhouette like this. Normally I'd leave these pictures as a blue picture, but I just thought this one looked rather nice in black and white. I think the three jacks come out better in black and white. This picture was actually taken with the WACP, so with a D850 and 2870 with the WACP1. Suitable housing retro flashes, shot on f13 again, 1/400th of a second as I was saying, and ISO 400. Right, next picture. Another manta, this time a reef manta rather than an oceanic manta, and this one taken in the night rather than in the daytime, taken in Fesdu Lagoon, which is a place where mantas will come and feed on plankton that's attracted to the lights of dive boats. And in this case here, we put torches on the seabed, and that created really good feeding conditions, and the mantas would swoop around and take and gulp up the plankton that aggregated around our torches. And that's what that beam of light is on the left-hand side of the image, is a torch beam. I like this picture. It's a longer exposure, so to get some textures from the seabed, to get that feeling of movement of the mantas swooping by through this dive, I thought was really nice. And I find this sort of slightly different effect with the long exposure really quite attractive. So the settings on this one, this was taken with the Nikon D5 and the 13mm RS lens, as opposed in this case here, still Suba housing, still retro strobes. It's a long exposure, but there is a kiss of strobe to bring out that white on the manta. And then it's shot at f7. The RS lens is very good for being able to open up, because it's a water corrected lens. It doesn't have any problems with that, so I could shoot it at f7. In this case, there's nothing important in the corners of the frame to be worrying about. Taken on 1/4 of a second to get that blur with front curtain flash. Yes, front curtain flash. I was with the camera movement, front curtain flash, ISO 640. Right, on to number 16. This picture here is back to Socorro in Mexico, and these are bastard grunts in a nice little school here. And I like this picture only because I was able to work hammerheads into the background. Not perfectly. One of the hammerheads has disappeared behind the school. At the time I took this picture, I could hardly see the hammerheads when I was shooting this. I knew they were there. But this picture is a favourite of mine. It's not a great picture, but it's a favourite of mine from this year, just because I think it's so funny to be able to use hammerheads as a background interest in a picture. These hammerheads were around on this dive, and it was hard to get close to them. And by far the best way to get close to them was to try something like this and use them as a background opportunity rather than get close to them, is work them into a picture another way. So they were in the background behind this. I had to keep the WACP reasonably shut down to get enough depth of field. So although you can shoot the WACP more open, this was shot with the D850, 2870, Suba Retra as usual, WACP1, and then this was shot on f11 at 1/100th of a second, ISO 500. Moving into the Cayman Islands now, and during the Cayman workshops, I go to Cayman every year to run workshops. It's not always the most exciting trips for me, and I think, you know, it's always very productive photographically, but I tend to take variations of shots I've taken before, because on the workshop I tend to go to the dive sites that I think are best educationally and productivity wise for the workshop participants, as opposed for me. and so I end up having to photograph the same individual dive sites again and again and again over the years. So I don't tend to produce a lot of favorite images on those trips, just because, you know, you tend to be excited as a photographer about what's new and different. And so doing a slightly better version of an old shot, although that shot might be very good for me commercially because it's you know, it's a very nice picture, it's not necessarily going to make a top 20 like this, because it's feels a bit old hat to me, even though anyway, so we spend a lot of time in caves and caverns on that workshop. They're very good for making photographers learn to work ambient light, learn to use settings that maybe aren't the classic settings. But this isn't actually my favorite shot. The shot I wanted to talk about was this one. And this is a shot with Zuzu modeling in this picture. And I just really like this shot because, having dived this dive site so many times, it was just really exciting to find a new angle. And this picture's taken looking vertically upwards. There's a little gully, and underneath that gully there's a very colourful bit of coral rock, and with all these colourful sponges on it. And I just really like that. I hadn't seen this before, this opportunity, and so however many times you've dived a reef, however much you think you've photographed every angle, there's always a really interesting and different wide angle shot to take. And this for me is one of those images where, from probably fairly basic ingredients, I've produced, I think, a picture I really like, and a picture that's really different. And yeah, so I really like that shot. This shot here is taken with the D850, the 8-15mm lens, shot on f13, as always, pretty much for when I've got a fisheye on, 1/200th of a second, and ISO 400, and it's taken with the Subal housing and retro flashes. Right. Split levels of jellies. I've got 2 split levels of jellies to show you, and I really like both of them. This one here, taken in Canada, of a lion's mane jellyfish and the trees in Canada, and this picture here, the same species of jellyfish, actually a red lion's mane, but this one here in the Atlantic Ocean rather than the Pacific Ocean, and in Scotland as opposed to Canada. And this is in Scotland, inside Fingal's Cave, which is an amazing geological structure of these basaltic columns in Scotland and the island of Staffa. And I just like this picture here. It's very, very dark, this cave. It's not easy to shoot pictures in it. And I like this picture because it was kind of quite challenging to shoot. It's kind of a favourite because of that. So it's shot with the D850 and the 8-15mm lens. Subal housing retro flashes. Shot on an f20 to get enough depth of field so that the jellyfish and the basalt columns are both in focus. And shot at an 1/8 of a second because it was so dark in there, to try and get some light. There's flash on the jellyfish, so the jellyfish is nice and sharp with the flash, and the basalt columns are kind of sharp enough to work at an 1/8 of a second. I had to take a few frames to get a nice sharp one, because obviously I was at the surface and the sea wasn't staying completely still. And it shot an ISO 1250. Right. War bonnets next, and this isn't a favourite. This isn't in the top 20, but I do like this picture. This is a spiny head war bonnet. I've forgotten his name now. Anyway, this is the spiny head war bonnet, and this is a decorated war bonnet. The decorated is my favourite. This picture was taken with the MWL, but my favourite that made the top 20 is this one of the decorated war bonnet, sticking out of a hole in a sponge. Strangely, it's the spiny head war bonnets that I tend to find more in the sponges, but this one was in such a lovely setting, and it was a big goal of that trip to Canada, was shooting macro subjects and having these very colourful frames around them of the colourful reef life that you have there, the encrusting sponges, the soft corals, the plumos and enemies. And that was a big aim of the trip, was to shoot macro subjects in there. And one of the, you know, the must-have macro subjects that we're always trying to find are war bonnets, with their amazing expressive faces. They've got beautiful eyes. They've got these very elaborate cirri running across their faces and down their backs. And I really like this picture. It's got nice character, but a really great setting. And that was a big goal on that trip. Right, next picture here is taken in Raja Ampat now. And this picture here is a magenta dotty back, and quite a similar, I put these two together because they're quite similar in terms of what I was trying to do. It was about photographing a cool creature in a nice spot. And I think too often when we shoot macro, we get obsessed about the subject and don't think enough about the rest of the frame. We're often just happy if we just can get the rest of the frame black, and I'm always looking to try and do something more with my pictures than that. So I really like that this magenta dotty back was living in this hole in the reef, and the hole was completely surrounded by this lovely sponge. So it created a really interesting and very colourful image. This picture here was taken with the D850 and the 105mm lens, Subel and retro housing, so all the same as the last one. This one was taken on f14 at 1/250th of a second at ISO 125. This fish is quite small, and I think f14 was a pretty good choice in terms of getting enough separation of the fish and the sponge. I think probably if I'd had a bit more time, I'd like to have maybe shot this a click or two more open, just to try and blur the sponge a little bit more. I think it could look really cool if it was just really, really smooth. But I think because this subject is small enough, I'd got pretty good magnification, and f14 wasn't too bad a place to be. I think it's the only blackwater type sort of pelagic shot in the talk. And this is shot with a D850 and a 60mm lens, Subel housing, retro flashes. And this one is another picture from Vancouver Island. This picture here is taken of a clinging jellyfish, which tends to be around the kelp areas, particularly in shallow water, and it's a really cool looking jellyfish. I think I'd like this composition to be a bit more symmetrical, but the jellyfish was swimming sideways, and it was just, in reality, this was the opportunity it presented. This was shot on f10 at a 250th at ISO 125, and I remember when I was shooting this jellyfish, the light was kind of going straight through it. And that's why I ended up having to open up to f10, was to try and get more light through it. But I think, given my time again, I'd probably have shot this with a bit more of a closed aperture, just to have a bit more depth of field. And I would have loved to have got a more symmetrical pose from this cool little jelly. Right, on to the Red Sea and some wreck photography. I did some really nice sort of classic wreck photography this summer. Not necessarily favourite shots, but very shots that I'm really pleased with, shots that have been published already in several places, so that's really good. And this one shows Jenny modelling with one of the wrecks. This is the Chrysula K in the Red Sea. Really nice shape on the stern of this wreck, the arc as it goes round. And the stern of this wreck is very photogenic from lots of different angles. Right down on the seabed, it looks great, and floating up in mid-water, it looks great. Left and right side, or stern and port and starboard, it looks good of the stern. So it's a really good photogenic wreck area to work photographically, and this is a classic downward angle on it, getting the colour and detail of the wreck. But this wasn't actually my favourite shot from the wrecks. I did a lot of wreck photography, but I've photographed those Red Sea wrecks so many times, it's hard to get excited about new images. I mean, I've got some really nice ones of motorbikes on the Thistlegorm, but I've shot the motorbike so many times, it's not quite so exciting anymore. They're not really favourite shots, even though I know lots of people would like them. And the same with the kind of classic external shots. This is the engine room of the Janice D, and I think this is a kind of a favourite wreck shot from the year, just because these glassfish or these sweepers are always inside the engine room. And it's quite easy to get shots of them with the opening, the light hatch at the top there of the engine room. But it's not so common that you get them in such a neat formation. So I really like this picture here because I've got that nice neat formation. This picture here was taken with the D850, 8-15mm lens, and Subel housing, retro flashes, shot on f13 at 1/125th of a second, ISO 640, and that's our halfway point of the talk. So we'll keep on trucking. One of the things I do quite a lot on the Cayman workshop, as I was explaining, is that I don't always, I go to sites that I've photographed so much that I don't always have a lot I want to do photographically there. So I quite often will put a macro lens on, even if it's a great wide angle site, and just shoot some of the common reef fish. And however many times you see fairy basslets, you still find them a stunning, stunning fish. And I always enjoy trying to photograph them and making pleasing portraits of them. And this is a very nice portrait taken last year, I think, of a nice fairy basslet. Great coloration. I really like the pose of this. I like there's a little bit of seabed at the bottom of the picture. It could be very easy to have got this on a black background, completely black, but it's, I think the little bit of reef at the bottom just gives it some grounding photographically and makes the picture work well. But this is the picture that I've put in the top 10, which is just with two of them interacting. And I guess these are two males showing off to each other, having a bit of an argument. And you can see the one in the foreground has got his mouth open and he's showing some teeth and flaring his fins and trying to impress the one at the background. I don't think it's a male and female. I think it is two males sort of duking it out over the edge of a territory. This is shot with a D850 and the 105mm lens, Subal housing and retro flashes, f14. So although there's very little depth of field in this picture, it is quite well stopped down. It's just they're not very big fish, and you know, I was very close to them to make this picture. 1/250 per second, because I think with these colours they generally look best on black backgrounds. It just makes the colours pop. So 250 a second, ISO 160, just to quench all that ambient light and just let it be a flash lit picture. Right, on to Canada, back to Canada again, and this time with the EMWL, which is the bug eye lens from Nauticam, and that was my first trip with the new 160-degree optic for that lens, which really is transformative. I mean, it really just takes that lens up another notch, and it was great. This was actually pretty much the first photo I took with it, but I decided not to put this as a favourite. I think this lingcod is a real favourite of mine. It's not such a small subject as the nudibranch previously, but I think I really just like this composition with the lingcod really jumping out of the picture. But you also have a very nice reef story through the rest of the frame, with the plumos going underneath him, the plumos and enemies, and then in the background as well. So it wasn't very nice conditions when I took this picture, but I really like the image. This was taken with the D850 105mm, obviously with the MWL 160, Subal housing retro flashes. F16 with the MWL, you're always fighting a lack of depth of field because of the magnification. So you need to keep it stopped down. F16, I rarely shoot it more open than that. Shot a 20th of a second to try and get some light into the picture. The lingcod was nice and sharp because he was in the flash. The background isn't completely blur free, but it's not completely in focus because of the depth of field limitations, and I was willing to risk that slow shutter speed, so I didn't have to go too high on the ISO and shot on ISO 500. Right, number 7 is Anthias pictures, and I spent a lot of time in the Red Sea this summer shooting Anthias, and always really enjoy that. I think it was wonderful to be back seeing them again, and I made lots of different pictures from sort of this is a WACP. This is a wide angle shot with a model. So you've got Anthias, you've got Colourful Reef, you've got Diver, and you've got the Predators, a school of yellow dot trevallies in badgeads. Orange spotted trevallies, sorry, in the Carangoides badgeads in the background, hunting on the reef. And this is Jenny modelling in this picture here. With the school of fish, but yeah, very I really enjoy shooting Anthias in the Red Sea, try and work them into lots of pictures. This is a mating shot taken last year as well, with a male displaying to or actually spawning with a female, and he's got his mouth open as they spawn on a spawning rise. Very, very fast action. You shoot lots and lots of these, and most of them are out of focus, and every now and again you get one that's in focus. But actually what I really enjoy is shooting them in the evenings, where you can create really nice backgrounds. And I'm not a big fan of artificial backgrounds, and I like to challenge myself as a photographer to create really nice backgrounds out of the natural world underwater. I'm not someone who feels that the natural world underwater needs to be jazzed up with artificial colours or artificial elements in terms of the background. So here I've purposely chosen to use that evening sunlight playing on the water, and then shoot a shot with an open aperture, so that sunlight playing on the surface of the water is blurred into these blotches, which I think are very attractive, and with the fish in front. And I really like this silhouette shot, but actually the one I've chosen is a shot with flash. And I really like actually the out of focus Anthias in the background as well, how they blur into the bokeh bubbles or the bokeh blotches from the lens. So this is shot with D850 and 105mm lens, Subal and Retra. This is shot on f5. I find f5's about right with the Anthias. It does depend how deep you're shooting. in terms of, I don't really want the bokeh blobs any bigger than this. So that's why I was on f5. I think that previous shot, it was probably a little bit more open because the Anthea's not quite so big in the frame. So f5, 1/1000th of a second shot using high-speed flash sync, and ISO 100. Obviously the sun's very bright, so you need that high-speed flash sync. You can't shoot into the sun with an open aperture and not have something to deal with the fact that the sun is super bright, and high-speed flash sync makes these shots very easy. Another Anthea shot, but this one is from the Maldives. This shot with the D5 and the 105mm lens, Subal housing retro flashes. Shot on f14 at 1/250 second at ISO 250. This was a hawkfish eating an Antheus. And although this is shot on f14, because I was so close, and this was relatively fast action, I don't have quite enough depth of field. I wish I had shot this sort of f18, f20, and just had slightly more depth of field. The eye of the hawkfish is completely sharp, and I chose to focus there, but it would have been nice to have had just a little bit more sharpness on that face of the Antheus, who obviously is breathing his last breath there, and as he was about to get eaten. And yeah, so I really like this photo. I think it's really cool. But it always makes me wish I had a bit more depth of field, but it was fleeting action, and f14 was as much as I gave it. I think it was probably because f14 was fine when I was shooting it from a bit further away, and then as I sort of inched my way closer, not wanting to disturb the behavior but trying to get my frame filled, I probably should have shut my aperture down a little bit more as well. Right, now we're into the top 5. This, just checking it's still recording. Yeah. This picture here is from my recent trip to Missoul, and this is a picture of a bleached anemone with a spine cheek anemone fish in it. And this picture just really appeals to me because I think it's, when I see bleaching on coral reefs, it's always a story you want to tell, but it's quite a hard story to tell visually as a still photographer in a single image. It works very well with 2 images, before and afters. It works very well as video sequences, again, sort of showing you normal and then showing you bleached. It's quite hard to shoot bleached corals and bleached anemones and create images that make people concerned, because they do look very beautiful when they're bleached, and this picture does too. But I really like the contrast between the very colourful anemone and the very bleached coral here. Anemone here, sorry, the really colourful fish and the really bleached anemone, and I think that works really, really well. So this was taken with the D850 and the 105mm lens, Subal housing retro flashes, f16 at 1/250th of a second, ISO 125. Number 4, this is a picture I've wanted since I last went to Socorro, in that I never quite got the shots I wanted of the cleaning behaviour when I last went to Socorro. And so that was a really high priority shot for me, and I really like this shot because for me it tells that whole story in one go. It tells why the mantas come to these volcanic outcrops, and they do so that they can meet these bright orange clarion angelfish, which are endemic to the area, and act as cleaners. And each of these angelfish are big fish. They're each this sort of size fish, and yet next to the manta they look tiny, because these giant Pacific mantas are really huge. These oceanic mantas are massive, great fish. So great to see all these, and I just like the fact that you kind of can see the whole story of how the angelfish are coming out from the reef. The mantas come to the reef to get to the angelfish have come out from the reef and are cleaning the manta. And I really love the pose of the manta in this picture. It's a very, you can see the mantas upside down and it just tells for me the whole story. So no one else seems to like this picture, but I really, really like it. So it's in my top view. Taken with D850, 2870, WACP1, Subal housing. I think I'd turn the strobes off for this one because it was relatively shallow. So I had the retro strobes on, but I don't think I used them for this. F8, 1/250th of a second. And those settings also make me think it wasn't with much strobe in this, or any strobe in this, because I've gone to a relatively open aperture and a fast shutter speed to make sure I freeze everything in the movement, because I haven't got flash, and then ISO 500. Right, top 3. I think 2 of these are from Missoul. And just because those pictures are new, they're favourites. The nature of one of these things, I'm sure if I chose my favourites from this year, in a couple of years' time, they'd be very different. This picture here is a split level scene of the resort at Missul Resort. And I really like this picture because I took lots of pictures of just the corals and the islands. But I think one of the most amazing things about Missul Resort isn't that they just have these corals growing there, but that they've built the resort in such a sensitive way that the corals continue to thrive right below your feet. Because they have been very careful throughout all the building process. They're very careful with all their water management, you know, rain runoff and everything like that, so that these reefs stay as healthy as this. And I think this picture is just a fantastic testament to what a great job they do, and how if you do develop things sensitively, you can have, you know, development, you can have a really positive ecotourism resort that doesn't just help protect the reefs around this island, they actually fund a whole marine protected area. And I think this picture, for me anyway, speaks on all those things. So it's a split level shot. So I focused underwater and shut the aperture right down. So this picture here is taken with the D850, 8-15, Subal housing and Zen 230 dome. There were no strobes in this picture, just went in with the housing. Taken with an F22, 1/125th of a second, ISO 640. I generally like to shoot these available light split levels at quite high ISOs. I think you're never going to, because you're already shooting an F22, you're probably already going to lose a bit of ultimate image quality due to refraction. So losing a bit with ISO is not really a big deal as well. You need to be at F22 or F20 to get really sharp underwater detail and really sharp above water detail. And so I think this is a good all-round settings for these types of pictures. And of course, these days our cameras are so great at those ISO settings. Right, next picture, on to the final two. Back to Canada, the other side across the Pacific Ocean, to the other side, and going to the colder waters. We were very lucky with the weather in Canada in that we had sun and almost no rain the whole time we were there. But unfortunately, sun up in Canada means algae blooms. And so we had very poor visibility for our whole trip, which was quite frustrating, really, because I'd really wanted to shoot a lot of wide angle there. But it was quite challenging conditions for wide angle. I still did some wide angle, but I did probably more macro than I was intending to up there, just because the macro was unaffected by the visibility, whereas the wide angle was impacted by the visibility. I really like this shot of this red Irish lord in this colourful environment. I think years ago I would have probably got closer to the red Irish lord and gone for ultimate sort of contest impact. But what I like about this image is that actually I've been subtle enough to actually tell the bigger story of how this colourful fish is actually perfectly camouflaged in this colourful environment with the yellow sponges, the red soft corals and the white plumose anemones all around it. And you see all those colours in the camouflage of the red Irish lord. This was taken with the D850 and the 8-15mm lens, Subal housing retro flash. The only interesting bit of equipment is I will actually use the mini dome with this one. I rarely shoot the mini dome with full frame. It's quite compromised optically. Certainly the corner sharpness goes away pretty quickly with it, unless you can be very close and shut the aperture right down. And but I did for this one because that poor visibility, it was kind of, it was all very close focus wide angle anyway, so why not put the mini dome on and be able to get lighting a little bit tighter on everything. So this was shot on f16, 1/60th of a second, ISO 40. I think on a clear day, the sun rays coming through the trees in the background would look stunning in this composition, and just in the murk, they just about peek through. But yeah, what a pity there wasn't another sort of twice the visibility, which would be, you know, probably still below normal for the area. But I think this picture would have looked incredible with a bit more visibility. It would have just really, that whole back part of the image would just absolutely pop. And the final picture, this is what I chose as my favourite from the year, just because it was sort of irresistible when I put all the pictures on my screen. I was like, well, it's got to be that one really, is this young green turtle that I photographed in Missul, just on a dusk dive. It was very friendly. It was trying to eat my camera. It was trying to eat the dome ports on the domes on the strobes actually, and it's shot with the D850 105mm lens and the EMWL 160, allowing me to create this real in-the-face macro wide-angle picture of this cool turtle. It taken on f13 at 1/20th of a second. It was very dark. It was, you know, close to sunset. So I had to sort of compromise a bit on the shutter speed, but I knew that the flash would freeze everything and it would be nice and sharp. and then taken on ISO 500. So that's my favorite shot. Not a complicated shot, not a arty composition, but just what a wonderful pose from the animal. And I think that's one of the things that takes me, or keeps me going underwater time and time again, is to meet characters like this guy. So hopefully you've enjoyed that run through of 20 of my favorite shots from the last year. I imagine if I did this again in a few days' time, I'd choose a completely different 20, but these are the ones that I went with today. I felt they were all images that added something to my portfolio. They weren't just, I'll put myself back up full screen. They weren't just pictures that, you know, necessarily are crowd pleasers. They're pictures that really please me. So it's very personal, top 20 for the year. So I'd recommend to any photographer, it's always good at the end of a year's shooting to pull your pictures together like that. I think it's a good way of thinking about what you've achieved, what styles of pictures that you've been drawn to during the year. And I think that sets you up very well for the following year. And actually, it's already February now, and I've done my first trips for this year. And I have to say my 2023 year is off to a much better start than my 2022 year was. So hopefully when I'm back doing one of these again this time next year, I'll have some really stunning images to show you. Bye-bye.